It is Southeastern 14, talking SEC football. We're going to dive into some Florida Gators football day today as Nick De La Torre joins us. We're going to dive into all things Gators. But first, got to remind you about our friends over at Bet Online, your number one source for all of your summer sports this season: MLB, golf, NBA, NHL, playoff stats, news, scores available to you there. You can get the latest odds and lines, including the latest team matchups, player props, and odds on just about every sport out there. So head over to their website or use your mobile device to get in on the action. Bet Online, where the game starts. So the Florida Gators, they've wrapped up spring practice, just as entering another year with Billy Napier leading the charge there in Gainesville. You got Graham Mertz back at quarterback. Just what's the overall vibe as they've wrapped up spring practice? They had their spring game. Just if you had to kind of sum up what the folks are feeling there in Gainesville, what would you say?
I think there's cautious optimism. Obviously, you get Graham Mertz back, and I think we have such a deep group of quarterbacks that you've seen go to a new school in the transfer portal and have a great year too. And I think when you're not learning your teammates' names, it's probably easier to play quarterback. And I think going into year two, fans are really excited about the potential that Graham Mertz has. Obviously, DJ Lagway, the number one quarterback, 5-star quarterback, sitting in the wings. He won't start, but I think you got to figure out a way to get him involved. And then Florida had a really a total renovation on defense. You get 3 new coaches, a slew of defensive players from the transfer portal, and then some highly recruited players, highly talented players that will be true freshmen and make an impact like LJ McCray. I think there's a lot of excitement, and then you're quickly slapped in the face with a schedule that some are calling one of the hardest schedules ever created. 11 of the 12 games are against Power. What do we want to call them? Power 4? Whatever we figured it out. There's now used to be Power 5, but outside of a September 7th Samford cupcake, it's Miami, A&M, Mississippi State, UCF, Florida State, Georgia. The typical teams in the SEC. So it's a brutal schedule for a coach who is going into year 3 under 500, 11-14.
Is this a Florida team you think that they have assembled that could kind of get Napier over that hump and could get the Gators going, in a direction? You mentioned the schedule, and there's no way around that. But do you think this is a Florida team that could win some games maybe that folks think they may not?
I don't know about that. To me, it all starts, you have to win that first game. Mario Cristobal, just because of being hired the same year as Billy Napier, Mario was a coach that some Gator fans wanted Florida to go after. It's going to be tough. Both coaches are under 500 going into that week 1 game. If Florida, or both coaches then are selling hope. And I think it's probably easier for Cristobal to write off a loss being on the road, playing that game in Gainesville. It's going to be hard for Billy Napier to win over the fan base, some of the fan base who he's already lost, or to keep fans on his bandwagon if you lose to Miami starting August 31st. So when you look at the schedule, there's some definite trap games. Billy Napier hasn't beat Kentucky. You need to beat Tennessee at home. You'd have to beat UCF, and that's a team who adds probably one of the most Gus Malzahn quarterbacks ever created in KJ Jefferson. And KJ already came in and beat Florida in the swamp last year with Arkansas. So I think a lot of fans will see UCF and say that's a definite win. And I'd caution that UCF is not a pushover coming into the swamp week 4 of the season. So there's some games, and when I look at the Florida schedule, I think 7-5 would be a great year. And then you would need to win a bowl game to be at 500 if you're Billy Napier after that. So there's some games like you're not going to beat Georgia, you're not going to beat Tennessee, but you can lose in a way that shows growth. I think beating Kentucky is necessary. Beating Tennessee at home, at Tennessee, is necessary. That's a huge road win for a team who hasn't played well on the road. And then finally getting over the Kentucky hump, which is not a sentence I ever thought I would say, covering the Florida Gators since 2013, getting over the Kentucky hump.
As far as this team goes, and you mentioned Graham Mertz, quarterback, back for another year. We know what he's capable of. What do you like about him, and what are the pieces around him that can make him successful this year?
Yeah, I was not a Graham Mertz believer last year, and a lot of Florida fans were angry. And I get it. What are you doing going to Wisconsin to find Anthony Richardson's replacement? Wisconsin not only doesn't throw the ball, they don't have interest in throwing the ball, and you're going to get their quarterback. And Graham Mertz had a ton of interceptions. So I think what he did early on was learn the playbook, earn the respect of the coaching staff and the players around him. And then he's as tough as, a $2 steak. And I remember telling him, I think it was after the South Carolina game last year, I was like, man, you're tough as hell. And I wish they didn't make you prove it every week, because more times than not, he was peeling himself off the grass. So I think the biggest thing for Graham is at this time last year, he was still learning, Ricky Pearsall's names. He hadn't even thrown to Eugene Wilson yet, who would end up being the guy who caught the second most number of passes from Graham last year. Eugene wasn't even on campus at this point. So just that familiarity, I think, is something that I think will help Graham go from really good last year to potentially great this year. One of the better quarterbacks, I think, in the SEC. Around him, you lose Trevor Etienne, and I think that is probably worse for Florida's perception on the outside as a program than it will be for production. Florida gets Montreal Johnson back. They have a sophomore in Trayon Webb, who's just from up the road in Jacksonville. And then you've got two really, really talented freshman running backs in Jaden Baugh and KD Daniels. Daniels from Mississippi. He did everything in high school in Mississippi. I think he even probably packed the books for away games, quarterback, receiver, running back. And then Jaden Baugh was the one who really showed up in the spring game, the way he runs the ball. So I think running back is fine. Receiver, you get Chimere Dike, who had a great relationship with Graham. Those guys started on the scout team together at Wisconsin. And you could tell that relationship right away once Dike got on campus. And then Florida's got a bunch of young, kind of unproven guys. Khalil Jackson's a guy who has shown up on highlight reels, but not really someone who catches a ton of passes. He'll have more opportunity this year. And then a couple of redshirt freshmen in Aiden Mizell and Andy Jean, who I think are really good and I think project as really good players. We just haven't seen it yet. So the big question mark for me will be the offensive line. I already mentioned that Graham had to prove how tough he was every year. I don't know that Florida got significantly better on the offensive line through the transfer portal. You're going to have one of those guys, Brandon Crenshaw-Dixon, who signed from San Diego State, start at right tackle. Austin Barber didn't have a good 2023, but was playing with multiple injuries throughout the year. I think you found a center in Jake Slaughter, and you're going to be young inside. So Florida's offensive line could, as much as I talked about and how good I think everything else could be, none of it matters if you're not blocking, run blocking or pass blocking. So to me, the offensive line is going to be the massive question mark for Florida going into the year.
You mentioned at the top kind of the revamp of the defense. Talk to me about that. What has the Gators done in the offseason to rework the defense you got to have a good defense in the SEC?
Everyone, points to Billy Napier's play calling, but during Florida's 5-game losing streak to end last year, they were averaging 38.5 points a game given up, which includes the Jaden Daniels all-universe game where I think he had 600 yards of total offense on his own, 600 plus. Florida's defense needed a change. They did not tackle well. So they went immediately and got Asa Turner from Washington, DJ Douglas from Tulane, and Traquez Bridges from Oregon to help them in the secondary in terms of tackling. They went and got Pup Howard from South Carolina, who I think is going to have a chance to start next to Shamar James, who's an all-SEC type of talent. You get Jason Marshall back. Devin Moore, the best ability is availability, and Devin Moore has only been healthy for half of the games he's been on campus for in 2 years. I think those are your starting cornerbacks. So what Florida was able to do was get a bunch of veteran guys who can tackle to go along with a really talented past 2 recruiting classes on defense. So you're going to be young, but there's a sprinkling in of veteran leadership on the line. You get players like Justice Boone, who missed last year with a knee injury back. You get Joey Slackman, who's the reigning Ivy League Defensive Player of the Year. You get him to transfer in, Caleb Banks, Cam Jackson, and then young guys like TJ Searcy and Kelby Collins and LJ McCray, who I think all can have an opportunity to play. So I think Florida's offense is good. I think the defense got a lot better through the transfer portal. I also really like the additions of Ron Roberts and Will Harris into the defensive scheme. I can't forget Gerald Chapman, who is the new defensive line coach. We get some practice availability, and he is loud. You hear Gerald Chapman before you see him, which probably goes right along in line with being a coach on one of the offensive or defensive lines of scrimmage.
On the defense, would you say the line is stronger, secondary stronger? They both kind of complement each other. What does that look like?
Well, yeah, football, that it complements each other. You know, you could have a bunch of All-American cornerbacks, but if the defensive line is giving opposing quarterbacks 8 seconds to throw, it's really hard to cover someone for 8 seconds. I don't know that Florida has an first team All-SEC guy on the defensive line, but they're 2 or 3 deep at every spot. And if you can get a healthy rotation and get those guys 20, 25 snaps a game where they're now fresh in the fourth quarter going up against an offensive lineman who's playing snap 70, 72, 75, I think that's where Florida will thrive, is just having that depth on the defensive line. In the secondary, I think they have ball hawks. And that's something where last year, I don't know that Florida got their hands on the ball enough. I think the first interception of the year didn't come until Devin Moore got one against Arkansas in November. So it's a defensive secondary that has to do a better job of getting their hands on the football. I think Devin Moore is a guy, it could be the X factor. He's one of the most talented players on the defense. He just hasn't been able to stay out of the training room. So when you look at him and the 3 veteran guys that they brought in, I think Florida should be a much better tackling team, and they have some guys who can get their hands on the football.
We sit here just in the last couple of days of April. I prefaced that before I entered this next question because guys will be, obviously, as people watch this, guys could be committing to Florida. Do you see the Gators hard after anyone, or do you see any position they're saying, hey, I want to get somebody out of this spring portal window to fill this position?
Yeah, I think the spring portal, they're looking right now for an offensive lineman, Jason Zamandela, who was just part of the 24 class, went to Southern California, but didn't make it long. I think you realize pretty quickly how far 2,000 miles away is once you get to campus as an 18-year-old. He's going to pick between UCF and Florida. I put in a prediction for Florida to land him. I think that'll be coming down this week. And then the only other one I really think that they're going after is Elijah Badger, a receiver from Arizona State. I know they've had Ricky Pearsall talk to him. And I think Pearsall can tell you, hey, listen, you might be looking for a lot of NIL money right now. But I left Arizona State, came to Florida, and the NFL NIL deal is much better than whatever NIL deal you're going to get. And I think the Ricky Pearsall story, he's a guy who, if he would have come out last year and not used his extra year of eligibility, might have been a 3rd or 4th round pick, comes back for his senior year and earns being the 31st overall pick in the draft. So to have a former teammate be able to tell you, hey, this is a great spot to come and develop. Look what they did for me. I think that would really help Florida. Florida went into this cycle looking for help on the interior offensive line, at tight end, and at receiver. They also had a walk-on Air Force graduate, Caleb Rios. I don't know how you graduate a service academy in less than 4 years, but he figured out a way to do it. So obviously a very, very smart kid, wants to get his master's in mechanical engineering at Florida, and he'll walk on at tight end. So if you already got your tight end, if you get Zamandela, that's an interior offensive lineman. I don't know if it's one that's ready to plug and play and start being an 18-year-old. And if you can get Badger on campus, chalk up the assist to Ricky Pearsall there, that would be, to me, Florida hitting on their 3 needs in this second transfer window.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what the Gators do. Nick De La Torre, joining us here. Nick, really appreciate you coming on, talking some Florida football. We will do it again real soon, but appreciate your time today.
Thanks. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We'll have more SEC football coverage as we get closer to the season here with Southeastern 14.